Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sighting happened just south of Mount Shasta. It was August of 2020. We decided to take a road trip to the northwest corner of California because, being the enthusiasts that we are, we thought it would be great to go visit some sites that have been notorious, as you might call it, for Bigfoot sightings or interactions. And I had just finished reading the Missing 411 series. I had just finished reading about the Hoopa Indian Reservation, and we thought it would be great to just hook up to the fifth wheel in the big truck, take the dog, and let's just go on a road trip. Now, being 2020, I think our best option because everything was closed. So we wanted to take some time off and just have a fun trip by ourselves. So it's 120 degrees where we live in the Arizona desert, and it just looked nice to us to go up to cooler temperatures. So once we got out of the desert and we got up into Northern California, we were headed west on Highway 44, which is a very small 2-lane highway. It has no shoulder in most areas. So if you think you need to pull off to the side, you're not going to, because one side of the highway, which would be on the south side of the highway, is river with boulders and very steep drop-offs and it's just, there's no place to pull off on that side. There's just a thin little razor edge to the highway on the south side. And that would have been the driver's side of the truck. And then on the passenger side of the truck, no place to pull over whatsoever, no shoulder, just hillside. And then off in the distance to the north, you can see Mount Shasta. I think the closest community would have been Whiskey Town. There's little stops along the highway, and there's nowhere for somebody to pull off the road, get out of their car, and hike down to that river or hike up the hill. It's just highway. And there was moderate traffic. It was about 2 p.m, beautiful weather, very bright sky, a little bit of knee-height grass on the driver's side, the cliff side that goes down to the river. And my eyes were going back and forth because I knew what country we were in. I knew we were in Weirdo Town because there's so much that's attributed to Mount Shasta area. People have reported so many different weird things in that area. So, and it's just a general habit of mine. When my husband's driving, I'm always just taking in the scenery, looking around. And what are we on this trip for? It's a kind of a Bigfooting trip. And of course I'm going to look for a roadside crossing. And the daylight, you don't expect to see anything, maybe a deer, maybe a skunk. But passing by this river, I kept glancing down there because I thought, if I was going to see a Bigfoot, it would probably be down there because there's the river and there's a little bit of shade. There's a little bit of cover. It's a warm day for this area. As we were passing this one particular bend, it was kind of a curve. We were curving towards the north. I look towards the grass that's on the left side, the driver's side of the truck, and we're not going very fast, 45 miles per hour. And there's a brownish red, hair-covered head and shoulders of something that is next to the highway, but down low because it's a cliff right there. So whatever it was standing below highway and in the cover of that grass. And it was kneeling down. It was squatting down to get out of view. And what struck me was it wasn't like a bear's head. It wasn't flat. It was round like a person's head. And it was a lot of reddish brown hair, not fur. It would look like hair. And as we went by, I couldn't say anything to my husband. I was stunned, and nothing could go through my brain. I just was stunned. And it was a good 10 minutes before finally I said to my husband, I saw something back there. And he goes, oh yeah? Cool. So I don't know if he took me seriously, but I really couldn't say, let's stop the truck and get out, because it was miles before we got to an area where there was a shoulder or a turnoff. And so finally when we did, there was so many people, and we had a fifth wheel behind the truck. There is no doing an easy U-turn to go back and look in an area. It's a big camper. And so we stopped and we looked to see if there was a ranger station. And of course, it's 2020. The ranger station's closed. And so we continued on our trip. But it was like something happened to my brain. I was so shocked that I had trouble coming up with the words, just describing to my husband what I saw. And it was a while. It was a while before I finally got my tongue back, or before I was finally able to say it was reddish brown hair, and it was ducking down like it was hiding from us. And it was rounded. It wasn't a flat head. It wasn't a bear. And I was so mad at myself not being able to vocalize what I saw. But I thought, who's going to believe me when I say we went on a Bigfooting trip and I saw one on the side of the road? But sometimes you just don't socialize with the right kind of people, I suppose. It was so fascinating to see something that we had longed to see for so long, and yet it shocked me so much that I was speechless. And I'm never speechless. I have plenty to say all the time. So we camped in Willow Creek that night because we wanted to go to the Bigfoot Museum. And we thought, well, there's no campground that we could go to, because at the time there's forest fires and the Forest Service had taken over anything that would have resembled a campground. That was their base camp. So we decided to just go up towards the mountains. I know from reading books about that area, you couldn't go to the Hoopa Reservation because of 2020. It was closed off too. So we just took back roads up into the mountains, and we backed our fifth wheel into an area that was right next to a stream. And one of those creepy nights where you hear things up in the forest above you. There's moss all over the trees hanging. So when we were out there with our flashlights looking, all you could hear was the babbling of the creek, and looking around with your flashlights, you just see the moss and the trees, and it was damp and cold, something we're not used to. So we didn't stay outside for too long. But yeah, it was a strange feeling to be in Bigfoot land and hearing weird crashing sounds of something up the hill from you. Strategically, any kind of a predator is going to stay above anything that it's interested in. And we thought, wow, what could be up there making that noise above us? So that could have been a bear. That could have been anything. But what I saw on the side of the road before, that was no bear. And there's very few things in the world that have the posture that a Bigfoot has or a human has. If it was a Bigfoot, it would have been a smaller one. The height, I would say, was maybe 5 to 6 feet tall, because it was not a large head. It was not a wide shoulder. It was more of a person that's average height. But the sun was shining right on the spot where it was standing. So I had a really good look at the color of that hair. And it's the same color that I color my hair too. I thought that was kind of funny. But very, very brief sighting, maybe 4 seconds. We weren't going very fast, but as it ducked down, it went out of view with that tall grass. The rest of that trip, uneventful, which was super disappointing because I researched all of these places in Northern California that would be a most likely place to see a Bigfoot. And the one place that we saw something, or I saw something, was not on the map. I hadn't done any kind of reading up on Shasta to do anything there. And then a previous experience that we had, we signed up for our first BFRO expedition. And that was in 2017. It was July of 2017. And it's in Arizona. And a lot of people, I work in a salon, a lot of customers were like, why would you go looking for Bigfoot in Arizona? Because they all are under the assumption that there's just one Bigfoot and he lives in California or Washington. And I explained to them, there's this area. It's called the Mogollon Rim. It's like the Grand Canyon, but it's completely covered in beautiful, massive ponderosa pines. And you can't put your arms around them. They're huge. And it's this massive canyon that goes for hundreds of miles. It's the world's largest ponderosa pine forest. It goes for hundreds of miles to the east, all the way to the New Mexico border. And for many, many years, there's been the Mogollon monster stories. People with scary interactions with something up there. Well, this group of BFRO investigators and people that were just enthusiasts, you go through this process where they've got to interview you and okay you to go with the group. And thankfully, we passed the test. I guess they want to make sure that you're going for the right intentions. And so I had to explain, I grew up in Arkansas, and so Boggy Creek was a matter of fact for us in Arkansas. I came from Greene County. That was where I was born. And in Greene County, that's where the first Sasquatch experience or sighting appeared in a print newspaper. And it was many, many decades ago. So Bigfoot was just a fact for us that were in northern Arkansas. And I always wanted to go on a BFRO expedition. I never had the money or the resources, and I never brought it up to my husband. And finally, when I told him, hey, there's an expedition in July, and we're probably going to have to camp in a tent because it's in very, very remote wilderness. We won't be able to take a camper, and it's for a Bigfoot expedition. And he didn't have much to say at first, and then eventually he started talking about spending time with his father in the Oregon wilderness when he was a child. And he said the screams that he would hear coming out of the forest would just turn his blood cold. And that excited me. I was, oh gosh, yes, we're going. So we took 6 months to get night vision, infrared, listening device, recording device. We had all of the equipment. It took us 6 months to get it all put together because we really didn't have what we needed to start with. We drove 6.5 hours to get to the Mogollon Rim, and it is right in the middle of the state, and we live on the far western half of the state. And we had never met any of these people before and did not know what to expect. We were told ahead of time that we couldn't bring firearms, and there's a code of conduct, and we're like, wow, this is the big time. Wow. And we get there, and it's a very cool, casual group of people from all different areas of the state, and everybody's got this really diverse background. It was so fascinating to get to know these people. One was an expert in botany, and one was a retired police officer, and one was a insurance investigator, and one was a supervisor for construction companies. But everybody had the same thing in common: Sasquatch or Bigfoot. So we sat around the campfire the first night, and we all talked about why we were there, what brought us to sign up for a Bigfoot expedition in the first place. And what excited me is hearing the same thing over and over. Well, when I was a kid, I saw this on TV, and I'm like, oh yeah, Saturday mornings used to be the only time that you could watch the Sasquatch shows or the ghost shows. There's a couple of channels that did it, and it was right before Halloween, and that was it. And the rest of the year, nothing. And then when the internet really got big and BFRO started their website, I spent hours looking at people's reports of their experiences, and I put myself in their shoes because it was just so terrifying sometimes and fascinating. And here I was sitting with a couple of investigators that wrote reports for these really amazing experiences. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like a little celebrity chaser here. I can't believe I'm sitting here with these people. Very matter-of-fact people mixed in with very animated, excited people that, did you hear that? That was a Bigfoot. It was a great mix of people to have our first experience with. It was a really neat forest with the ferns that grow up to waist height and the trees that go up so far up and cover the ground, where you have just darkness in a lot of areas of this forest because it's so shaded from the sun. And then beautiful, beautiful skies in the evenings, but you really couldn't see much of it, just the pink through the pine trees, because we were really deep into the forest. We camped in a humongous circle that took up about 4 acres. So we were all spread out pretty good. The first night that we set up our tent, we heard wolves howling in the distance because there's this reintroduction of Mexican gray wolves, and they were hanging out in that area at that time. So that was a huge introduction to how remote we were. The wolves were nearby. There's elk, there's mule deer, there's wild turkeys, there's raccoons, skunks, there's coatimundis. And I've never seen a coatimundi in person until I went to a Bigfoot expedition. So it was like being in a different world. And I'd been told previously that other BFRO expeditions happened in that same area. And the people that came from California and other places, they said, this is not Arizona. This couldn't be Arizona. It is just the elevation's 8,000 feet. There's soil instead of sand. And all of these humongous pine trees everywhere. And you put a drone up and you can circle around and you can see there's nothing but a canopy of green for miles and miles and miles. So that expedition, it was structured very, very nicely, where we split up into teams. Each team had at least one female. Everybody split up with their technology that they brought as well. We had our night vision and our infrared. And so my husband was on one team, I was on another, and each team was separated by miles. So we tried to communicate with handheld radios, but we were all so spread out, and we had canyons in between us at times. So sometimes you could hear, sometimes you couldn't. But anytime anybody was going to try and do anything like a wood knock, we would say something on the radio first. Going to do a wood knock in 10 seconds. And I'm going to do 2. And so then you wait, and then you do your 2 wood knocks, and then everybody stops and listens. And that worked a lot of the time, as long as the radios were working. Not a huge amount of interaction, but it was windy the very first expedition night that we went out. We had an area that my team went to that is nicknamed Spooky Camp because it is spooky. It's like devoid of noise for some reason. The acoustics are just like that, where you can clap your hands and there is no echo. There is nothing. The dead sound is amazing in that spot. Well, Spooky Camp, it's kind of on the edge of a ridge, of course, covered by these huge ponderosa pines. And you can follow a trail that goes down into this canyon. And before my team split up to go to that spot, one of the team leaders, who is one of those very matter-of-fact people, she shows me a map and she says, "This is where you are going to be." And she pointed to this little valley and she said, "Sasquatch lives there." And that, I had just the fear in my chest, because this is a person that, as I had gotten to know her, I'm like, this is not a person that exaggerates. So we went our separate ways on that first night expedition. We were trying wood knocks. We were trying rock clacks. We were trying calls. And then the wind picked up and all you could really hear was the trees and the wind. And so finally, after a while of being out there, about 10 o'clock at night, breezy, loud, we all said, okay, let's head back to base camp. So our group, we go back to where the truck is. It was about a 15-minute hike from where we had been down in that valley. And I kept searching with my night vision. I'm like, that's where Sasquatch lives. I'm going to see him, and never saw anything. So we get up to the truck, and the truck is kind of like it's parked in an area that's kind of like a cul-de-sac. It's a turnaround area on a forest road that has no trees in it. So you can park there and be out of the trees. Trees are all around it. And as I'm waiting for, Tammy to unlock the doors, it was her truck. I'm standing on the passenger side in pitch black because nobody's got lights on. We've got them, but nobody's using them. We're trying to minimize noise and light pollution everywhere we go. And I'd started taking all of my gear off because I had a waist pack that had stuff in it. I took my headlamp off and something hit my foot. And so as I'm digging, trying to find my headlamp, see what that was, because the forest was to my back, I hear Preston on the other side of the truck, who's also waiting for the doors to unlock. He says, "I just got hit with a pine cone." And so finally I find my headlamp and I look down, and there was a rounded, like maybe 8-inch piece of wood that had come from somewhere, and it hit me in the side of the foot, like it had been tossed over from the forest out in the darkness. We heard nothing, but both of us got hit like that. And so everybody decided, let's just hang out here for a little bit. Maybe something's going on. So we tried to talk casually, and how do you talk casually when all of a sudden all of the hairs are up on the back of your neck and you're like, oh, something is in the forest. Okay, well, let's just talk and pretend like we didn't notice anything. And all I could think of is, I'll tell a joke. It was a very inappropriate joke and nobody laughed. So then we finally managed to just kind of mill around and talk. And it was some time. We kept looking in our night visions. We kept looking through the forest, trying to see just something. And after about 10 minutes of milling around and talking, we hear what sound very heavy footprints walking away from us. Crash, 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 crash. And it got quieter as it went. And I know the area now where those footsteps came from. We've hiked in that area since then. And there's some deadfall. There's a lot of pine needles. There's a lot of boulders. And then it goes off the edge of the precipice there back down into the valley. And so we knew, well, something was here, and it took off. So we get in the truck and we head back to base camp, and we relayed our story to everybody there. And so we talked about the piece of wood hitting me. And of course, the team leader, she says, well, where's the piece of wood? I'm like, oh, I didn't think about bringing it with me. It's still sitting there. So we retrieved it the next day. But it was a couple of days of hiking around, like during the day and at night, and a little bit of, did you hear that? And not great experiences on my part. There were other people on the team that had fabulous experiences, and they were excitedly telling us about it at the end of the night around base camp. The 5th day that we were there, heavy rainstorm moved in with hail and wind and rain, and our tent was getting washed out and we were just soaked. And finally the rain stops, and it really was a heavy downpour. It was a major monsoon on top of that mountain. Finally the rain stops. Everything is soaked. The ground, the trees, everything. And we're just kind of regrouping. What do we do? This is our last night here. We all decided from base camp, since there's not going to be a lot of driving around in the mud, let's stay at base camp. Let's play some calls from somebody's phone and magnify it so it can be heard. Let's take some laser pointers and let's light up the trees a little bit, and let's pick some positions in our base camp area, and let's do that. So it was just a whole lot of goofery where we were playing really loud calls and flashing lights, and it was just, it probably looked like nonsense, but we thought, well, this is what we can do. And nothing happened. It was probably about 11 p.m. and we noticed a truck coming down the road, and they said, oh, that was our guy. He went down the road to what we call Broken Mirror by himself, and he must be on his way back now. Well, Broken Mirror has a history. There was a couple who had a campsite set up in this little area by themselves in the forest, and the mirror on their camper van was broken by a huge tree limb that was thrown from the forest at them in broad daylight. So it's called Broken Mirror. And so nobody talked to the guy that had been down there. He just went into his tent, and we're like, maybe we should go down to Broken Mirror since he's not there anymore. So 5 of us piled in our Land Rover and we went down there, and it wasn't a very far drive. It was probably 2 miles from base camp. And again, everything is just wet and cold and silent, because once again, we're in one of those areas of the forest where the sound just is dead. There's no echo if you make a sound. There's no sound coming from the forest. It seems like all of the animals decided it's been raining all day. I'm just going to go to bed. And we get into this Broken Mirror area, and it's a round, bare area with a rock campfire area in the very center. Probably measures about 30 feet across, this bare area. And if you look straight up in the middle, you're looking at stars, really surrounded by very, very thick ponderosa pine, where when we would look through our night vision or our thermal, all we saw was tree. They were just solid. We spotted a mule deer as we were getting parked, but get out of the truck and we all decide together, okay, we're going to put all of our electronics away and we're just going to listen. And didn't hear anything for a while, called back to base camp with our radios, and we had Carl with us. Carl is back at base camp, and Carl does a fantastic Bigfoot howl, and he's got lungs like you wouldn't believe. And so we asked him if he wanted to try a Bigfoot howl from base camp, and we heard it. It came across the canyon to us. It was a really good howl. And when he did that, we heard rustling in the trees around us, like small animals moving. Don't know why they decided that moment to get upset, but then it would go silent, and then nothing for a little while. So Preston had a fantastic idea. There's these rocks all over the place up there because it's an ancient ocean bed, and there's these pieces of coral that, it's all broken up and it's rocks. So you can find everywhere a rock, no matter where you are. And so Preston said, I'm going to do a couple of rock clacks. Okay. Well, we're standing in the center of this clearing. Preston does 2 rock clacks, and immediately to our left, 2 rock clacks in response. And that stunned all of us. We didn't expect to have anything in response. No echo. It was a pause of about 5 seconds after Preston did his 2 rock clacks. And then we hear this off to our left. the sound was close, but not that close, maybe 100 yards away from us. So now we're alarmed, and we're all just speaking so quietly to each other because we want to make sure everybody is armed, and we all are. We all were packing because you don't know what you're going to run into in the forest at night. And we stood there silently for a little while. And Preston decided to do more rock clacks, but this time he did 3. And when he did 3, there was no response. And so we waited a little while longer in the silence. And then Preston picked up the rocks again, and he did 2 rock clacks. And immediately we get a response from straight ahead, which would be from the north, 2 rock clacks. Quite audible, and no question, it was within 100 yards. So this, of course, terrified us because we just heard rock clacks to our left. Now we hear 2 from straight ahead of us, and we're peeking in our night vision and seeing nothing but trees. And in between all of this, you hear nothing from the forest. It's silent. There's just silence, cold, dead silence. Preston decides to do another rock clack. He does 1. No response. So he puts the rocks back down, and we mill about, of course, scared out of our wits at this point. But we're together. We're getting closer and closer to each other. We've all unconsciously backed ourselves up against each other in the very middle of this clearing. And we're just expecting at any minute something to come busting out of those trees at us. So everybody's got their hand on their weapon. And he picks up the rocks again, and he does 2 rock clacks. And immediately to our right, 2 rock clacks coming right back at us out of the forest. So now we are really scared. But nobody's saying anything. We're not trying not to blow it. We're obviously having some sort of an interaction here. And one of the people there, can't remember his name. He's been on many expeditions. He's had many experiences, and he said, I have never experienced anything like this before. And of course that makes you even more terrified. Like, hey, you're supposed to be the one with the experience, and we're the newbies, and we're counting on you. So we stood there for a little bit, nobody saying anything, but for some reason, all of us at the same time, it was kind of like the Scooby-Doo gang running to get into the mystery machine. All of us ran and got in that Land Rover as fast as we could, and we got back down the road. And it wasn't a real chatty bunch in the Land Rover on our way back to base camp. I think we were all just so shocked at what we had just experienced. And I was explaining to my husband, it's believed by some that these rock clacks that they do are to communicate with each other when they're out on a hunt. And so how mad are they if us idiots are out in the middle of the forest messing with them when they're trying to hunt? And so we get back to base camp. Everybody else is asleep. So we had nobody we could tell our story to. And all I could think to do was write it down in my little notebook, because I thought to write down everything so I can remember this, so I can look back on this and go, oh yeah, that's right, that happened too. And so finally the next day, we were able to tell everybody about that story, about the rock clacks. And, it's one of those things where you had to be there. We had some fog rolling in because it's canyons. I had my camera and I wanted to get a picture of that fog rolling into the canyon. And so my husband and I, we went down the road where we would easily have a view of the canyon above the pine trees. And I said, you park right here. I'm going to walk down into that little meadow. I want to get a photo of that fog. So it's just me and my camera. He stayed back up at the truck. And the whole time that I'm walking around down in that meadow trying to get my photos, I can hear, it kind of sounded like voices. It was, It was broad daylight, maybe 10 a.m. There was no wind. It was just that fog rolling in. but I could hear, it was kind of like when you stand underneath really big transmission lines for electricity, where you hear that hum, but there were no power lines. I was down in a meadow in the middle of nowhere, and I could hear, it was like voices floating in the air all around me. I wasn't alarmed. I didn't feel scared. It was just strange. So I turn around thinking that my husband's got the radio on in the truck, and I can just hear it down the hill. I start walking back up the pathway towards him, and there he is. He's on the pathway coming towards me. And he said, I was up at the truck, and I swear I heard somebody say, hi. And I said, well, that's weird, because down the hill from me, from where we are there, actually, I could hear voices floating in the air. It was very strange. And we all both went, huh. And we got in the truck and went back to base camp. And there was just so many weird things that happened up on that mountain that I finally said to somebody at the end of that expedition, it's as if this was paranormal stuff rather than Bigfoot stuff. And they winced, because I guess there's this other faction of people that believe Bigfoot is a paranormal thing. And so I didn't know that at the time, but it was like being in the Sherwood Forest, because no matter what time of day or night, something was happening around you, stuff that you couldn't explain. So the whole drive home, that was our last day there, the whole drive home, we were just shaking our heads and going, there's so much about that whole week that we can't explain. So we thought for sure, okay, we're going to be meeting these people, and we're being told don't bring a firearm. So we're going to have experiences in the forest. They're probably going to have people hiding out there in the forest and making sounds and trying to scare us, and we'll believe it's Bigfoot. And they don't want us to have firearms because they don't want us shooting their person that's out there in the woods. And then we get there, and we're told, no, it's okay. You need a firearm. There's mountain lions here. There's wolves here. There's things that can really hurt you. You need to have a firearm. And, oh, okay, that changes things. So it really opened our eyes to a whole new experience of doing these organized Bigfoot expeditions where you go that is known for activity, and whether it's published experiences on a website or not, it could be just a word of mouth thing, and a fantastic experience that, you know, we would tell our friends about it, because of course our friends think we're wacky for spending all this money on equipment and going on these adventures. But when we told them what we experienced, then they started looking at websites and watching YouTube videos and listening to podcasts, because they know we're not crazy. They just think we're wacky for going on these trips. But so there must be something to this. If this is happening in Arizona as well as all of these other places that you've traditionally heard about, then wow, maybe I need to start paying attention to this stuff. And so it was kind of cool that we turned a few people with our scary stories. But yeah, what it all boils down to is we like being scared.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. It's Pickup Man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, bucking hay bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Star. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the farm folks picking down home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards, backwards in double time. Getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Something going backwards, backwards in double time. Getting at the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the farm porch picking down home rhythm, ride chicken porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.